So what is wrong with feedback? I mean, everybody's loving it, everybody's talking about it, and most people tell me if I ask them, yes, I want feedback. And that's perfectly all right. But there are a couple of things that really go sideways if we give feedback to someone or if we get feedback from someone. I mean, they're not really going sideways. They're not really going wrong. But they're very, very problematic. And there are 6 reasons that I find extremely problematic that I would like to highlight in this very brief video. So let's take a look at each of the 6. My name is Jürgen, and I'm a business school professor here in Berlin, Germany, working with executives around the globe. And on this YouTube channel, I'm trying to share a couple of these discussions that we have usually in my classes that are about change management and leadership, and answer the most common questions that might come up. So if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat below, in the comments below. And now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Often leaders don't want to give negative feedback. I mean, negative feedback, at least from my point of view, is the one feedback that is most helpful for you to increase your performance in the organization and for your leader, because if you agree to the feedback and if you change your behavior properly, your performance most likely will go up. But the problem is, if I give you negative feedback, probably I have a conflict with you. And that is something that leaders usually want to avoid. They don't want to get in a conflict with one of their most valuable resources, with their employees. Because if they do so, they have a conflict and they still have to work with those people every single day in their professional life, of course, until one person resigns. But that's another topic. It gets even worse, just as a side remark, if people within a team have to give themselves feedback. So not the leader is giving feedback anymore, but the people are asked to give themselves feedback. And that seems to be extremely popular at the moment, especially in organizations that think that they're doing this type of new work, whatever that means. But that's an entirely different topic. The problem here is, if you have to give a fellow colleague of yourself, a peer, a feedback, again, you probably have a conflict with this person, and at the same time you depend on this person in your daily business routine. And this is the reason why I find it problematic that leaders are being taken away from the organizations, being taken away from teams. But again, that's another topic. So first reason, leaders and employees fear negative feedback because it might risk the relationship that they have with their peers or with their employees. Second reason, feedback seems to be objective, especially if you put a label on it, like you are on a scale between 1 and 5, you are a 4, or you are a 5, or you are 3. That creates the illusion of objectivity. But honestly, that's not. Feedback is far from being objective. In most cases, feedback is highly subjective. And that is a problem for most leaders, because very often they are unprepared and go into these type of meetings unprepared, not able to explain why an employee is a 3 or a 4 or 2 or whatever number they have chosen. And again, we're getting back to conflict, because if I would tell you you are a 3 on whatever scale you choose between 1 and 5, so 3 is pretty much in the middle. The first question that you probably have as my employee is, what is the difference between 3 and 4, and why am I a 3? Could you please explain that to me? And I, as a leader, am probably quite upset and scared, because I can't explain you why you are a number 3. Probably I can. But if you ask me, what is the difference between 3 and 4, and what specifically do I have to do to get from a 3 to a 4, that is very unlikely that this is going to happen. And the reason why these discussions are difficult is because, again, leaders come into these discussions unprepared. Employees, on the other hand, very often are very well prepared, and they push back. And again, you probably have a conflict. By the way, scales are a pretty nice thing, cynically speaking, because if you think about school grades, for example, in Germany, 1 is the very best grade, 6 is the worst grade. So forget the 6 because no one is really bad in organizations, of course. So we do it from 1 to 5. And then we turn it around. So 1 is very bad and 5 is very good. So what is actually happening in organizations if I ask leaders, or if HR is asking leaders to fill out these performance review forms and the scale between 1 and 5, again, 1 being the lowest grade, 5 being the highest grade, the leader thinks about a specific employee. And what they think is, okay, this guy is not a 5, so he's not a top performing guy. But if I should give him a 4, but if I give this guy a 4, he will be extremely upset, because that is literally like, we have a huge conflict. You have given me a 4, which basically means I'm not a very good employee. So what do? 4 might be quite likely, but then I have a conflict with this employee. Honestly, he's not very good, but I don't want to lose the 30-40% he's actually delivering. So I can't give him a 4. So I should give him a 3. But if I think about that as a leader, if I give him a 3, he will look at me, and I know this guy. He is so annoying at times. He will ask me, okay, you have given me a 3, but what is the difference between a 3 and a 2? Could you please explain that? And I can't. Now, definitely this guy is not a superhero. He's not a number 1. He's not one of the best. So it is pretty clear what this guy will get at the end. He will get grade number 2. And as you can see, we moved pretty fast from someone who is kind of a number 4 on the list to suddenly being number 2 on the list. And that, of course, will lead to, I don't know how many issues on the long run. So feedback is not objective at all, and leaders often want to avoid conflict with their most valuable resource, their employees. So that was reason number 1 and reason number 2. Let's take a look at the third reason. And the third reason is also a very, very problematic one from my point of view. Because if you get feedback, you probably don't learn something in the first place about how you can improve your very own behavior. What you will learn is how well you act according to the view of the world of the one person giving you feedback. You learn by receiving feedback how well you submit to the organization, to the system you're working in, and specifically how well you submit to the ideas of behavior of the person giving you the feedback. So if I give you feedback, let's say I want you to be punctual. So you often drop in late, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, and I'm giving you the feedback and tell you, hey, look, I don't like that. I would like you to be punctual. Of course, that feedback giving was not very good, but that's another topic. So I give you the feedback that I want you to be more punctual. And what you learn is that punctuality seems to be very, very important for me or the organization you're working in. So basically, if you get feedback, you learn how well are you trained based on the idea of the person sitting in front of you. So always take feedback with a grain of salt. You probably don't want to become a well-trained puppy. I mean, that would be the extreme. If you do something, if you do the trick, your owner will give you a cookie to eat. And you don't want to be a well-trained puppy. But at a certain extent, you have to. Because if you get feedback, again, that is extremely valuable for you, because you learn how well you act, how well you perform based on the ideas of the system overall, and more importantly, based on the perception of your boss. And that is extremely helpful, because if you do not submit yourself to the system will force you out. The better you adapt, the better it will be when it comes to your performance rating. So stick to the rules of the organization will make your life way easier. The problem here is if you don't like the rules and if they don't match your values, but again, that's also a totally different topic. So what you learn when you get feedback, you probably don't learn something about yourself. You learn how well trained you as a puppy are in the organization. Sorry if that sounds pretty drastic, but it kind of is, at least from my point of view. Let's talk about the fourth reason why getting feedback can be quite problematic. And while we have focused first in the first three things onto your relationship to other people, now let's take a look at you as an individual, at yourself. And I think the fourth reason why it is problematic to receive feedback is, especially if it's negative feedback, that you might be embarrassed, that you might feel ashamed. Think about some cultures that know the concept of losing face, which is a very nice description of what is probably happening in a lot of us. And if you get negative feedback, if you feel ashamed, if you feel shame, it is probably shame of learning, because you just have learned by the feedback that you are not very good at something. Good from the perspective of your boss, good from the perspective of the system, the rules of the system. Think about the reason that we have discussed before. So you probably feel shame of learning. And if you feel shame, it might be possible that you regress, that you fall back to behavior that you have learned as a child, and that your emotions kick in without you being fully aware of that. So you regress. And when you regress, it is impossible to think strategically and think rationally about something. And it is quite likely that so-called ego defenses or social defenses kick in, and that you push back the feedback that you have just gotten. Ego defenses also is another topic that I might cover here on this channel. And one defense, just to share one, is rationalization. So you rationalize things, and by rationalizing them, you probably don't take the feedback. So I would encourage you, instead of pushing that away, instead of regressing, and it's easy said, but difficult to be done, try to be rational if you get feedback. See it as a data point, and data is neither good nor bad. It's just your thinking and your individual judgment that makes it good or bad. So any feedback is data, and that's about it. And treat the data, detach yourself from the data, and try to take a look at it and think about, okay, what can you learn from this shame that you just have experienced? If you are ashamed, or if you experience negative feedback, if you experience frustration, if you experience emotions, strong emotions, negative emotions during the process of getting feedback, it is quite likely that defenses kick in, social or ego defenses. And the idea of defenses is they're pretty good, actually. The idea of defenses is that they help you to maintain a positive self. So every time something is threatening you psychologically, and negative feedback can be perceived as a threat, then your defenses might kick in to prevent you to get a negative view of yourself. So defenses are actually quite a good thing. I will cover them in another video, but let's just take one or two defenses to illustrate them. So if you get negative feedback, one defense can be that you rationalize the feedback, which is quite good, because I told you a couple of seconds ago that you should detach from the emotions in case you get feedback and see them as data. So detachment, rationalization is kind of a good thing to a certain extent. But if you rationalize it and you do not accept feedback, I mean, you don't have to accept any feedback anyways, but if you accept feedback and want to learn from that, which is obviously a good idea, and you rationalize it too much, then probably the learning potential will be diminished. So rationalization is one kind of a defense. Another kind of a defense is if you force unwanted things out of your mind, if you try to ignore them, again, that can be quite helpful. And I think it's a very positive thing in terms of resilience if you are able to force unwanted negative things out of your mind. But if you do this constantly, obviously you will be in trouble at one point. Defenses, again, are a pretty amazing thing because they protect you. They protect your psychological well-being, but at the same time, they can prevent that you learn from feedback. And that was the fifth reason why feedback, in this case, getting feedback, can be problematic. Now let's take a look at the last reason why getting feedback and giving feedback is problematic. And that has to do with your role as a leader. So if you are in a leadership position, if you manage people and people try to give you feedback, I already said that this can threaten your psychological self-image. So you feel bad, you feel ashamed because someone is telling you that you probably should do this or that from their point of view. And what is happening, and we should continue this discussion when it comes to roles and role theory, which is another topic that I'm going to cover. So when you are in a role, in a leadership role, that provides you with social advantages, which is something that leadership roles usually do. As a leader, you have a lot of social advantages. You are admired, you have a company car, you probably have a bigger office, all these old perks that we all know and probably we all love. So if you are in a role that provides social advantages, you want to prove yourself and others that you are efficient in this role, that you're doing a good job, that you're a good leader, whatever that means. Also another topic. But you want to prove yourself and others that you're doing a good job. And negative feedback obviously threatens this attempt of doing a good job. So if you are not aware of that, and if you get negative feedback, and you feel threatened in your role enactment, again, your defenses probably kick in and you react negatively to feedback. And that is a pretty bad thing. Because if you do not take feedback well as a leader, your employees will learn something. They will learn helplessness. And that is extremely problematic because if they learn helplessness, which means if I, as your employee, give you feedback and you don't do anything with it, I learn that it doesn't make a difference. So why should I give you feedback anyways? So your people will not talk to you anymore. The second problem is, and that's probably even worse, if you react negatively to the feedback that you have gotten, so if your defenses kick in a way so that the employees feel negative repercussions based on their feedback, that's even worse because, they learn if they give you feedback, they're getting beaten up. And, beaten up is a pretty weird and strong picture. It can be a gesture. It can be a word. As a leader, people are focusing so much on what you do and what you say, on tiny little details. And if you do not act appropriately, and you're under the spotlight as a leader, people learn again that it is probably not a good idea to give you feedback. So they don't do it. And the end result, if you as a leader don't take feedback very well, is a concept that is called organizational silence. Everybody knows that something is going wrong, but incompetent leaders are an undiscussable. It is not allowed to discuss this publicly. It will be discussed in the area where people smoke and chat behind closed doors, but not in public and not in front of the leader. By the way, I also have experienced situations where the employees started crying because I asked them to give feedback to their direct boss. That was a weird experience, but that explained how this particular leader had taken the feedback in the past or not had taken the feedback in the past. So be aware that if you are in a role that provides social advantages as a leader, it is quite likely that you will feel threatened and that your self-defenses will kick in. And that was the sixth reason why feedback is a problematic thing. So that sounds like pretty bad news, doesn't it? So it's weird. Everybody's praising feedback, and now I just tried to tell you at least six reasons out of so many reasons why feedback is a problematic thing and why you should be very, very careful if you give feedback and if you receive feedback. And I can assure you, these were just six reasons, but it's actually worse. There are many, many more reasons why giving and receiving feedback is very problematic. So what can you do? Let's try to give it a positive twist and end with something that is actually quite helpful. And I think it's pretty simple from my point of view. Again, feedback, and especially also negative feedback, can be very, very positive for the relationship that you have with your employees. If you take it well, if it's well given, and if you take it well. Also, it helps you to make your people grow. You can help your people grow if you give them feedback. It helps them to adapt better to the organization they're working in. And ultimately, of course, if your people are getting better, you will be more successful as a leader. So from my point of view, the one fundamental task of a leader should be grow your own people. The second thing I totally recommend is always be prepared. Always be prepared. Preparation always is written preparation. So, and it doesn't have to be like a 2-hour preparation for whatever you do. Every time you go into a meeting, and I mean, that's a general recommendation anytime, anywhere. Every time you go into a meeting, take your time, open Outlook, go into the calendar. If you're using Outlook or whatever program you use, go into the calendar and just take 5 minutes, 2 minutes, just take a couple of minutes, sit down and write down what you want to achieve in the meeting, how you want to proceed, what your key arguments are, and so on and so forth. Just write it down and then hit print. And on the way out of your office, if you have a physical meeting, grab the piece of paper and take it with you to the meeting. Always, always prepare, especially when it comes to feedback processes. And by the way, giving feedback once a year, obviously that's crap. Doesn't make sense at all. So you don't have to start with a huge list where you have compiled ideas of a year. So always be prepared. Preparation always is written. If someone is giving you feedback, those person is trying to put you in a box. This person is trying to put you into their box. They're trying to make a well-trained puppy out of you. And that is not always a bad thing, because the better you know the rules of the game, the better you know what your boss is expecting from you, the more resources you will get, which is obviously a good thing. So that's always a balance between how much do you want to submit yourself to the system and how much do you have your own idea. Ultimately, that might lead to the very important question, is this the right company for you? Because I suppose you can work anywhere. You just have to apply. Embrace the shame of learning. For me, negative feedback and shame is something like a needle that someone is putting into you. So someone is putting a needle into you and that hurts. And there are basically two ways to deal with that. One reason is, and I think that's the most common and very natural reaction, you grab the needle, pull it out of you and try to throw it away and yell at the person who did that to you. It's an idiot, of course. But that's not very helpful from my point of view. If someone is putting a needle into you and it hurts, try to hold the needle, because there is a red thread attached to this needle. And if you follow this thread, it might lead you to a very interesting discovery about yourself, why you are annoyed and what has happened at that point in time. So try to embrace that, try to embrace the pain and the frustration, and try to learn from that, if it is possible. It's not possible in all cases, but I suggest try to learn from that whenever it is possible. If you are giving someone negative feedback, always keep in mind that if you point with a finger at someone and say, you have done this or that, I don't like that. If you point with a finger at someone, 3 fingers are pointing back at you. So what is your part of the behavior? What is your own thing? And what does it tell you about yourself if you give this feedback to someone else? And by the way, of course, 1 finger is pointing in the very bad environments and everything is bad and the system and whatever. But if you do this, always keep those 3 fingers in mind. Quite important from my point of view. Like I said earlier on, feedback is data. And data is neither good nor bad. So try to treat feedback as data. And before you judge, before you put your assumptions into these data points, try to see them as data. And that helps you to detach a little bit emotionally. In this case, it might be a good idea. And to think more strategically what is relevant and what is not relevant for you in this moment and for you as an employee. And the last point, accept your own edges. We are all edgy people. You either like someone or you don't like someone because we are all individuals in a way. And be compassionate about these things. Be compassionate about the things that you probably can't do. And be compassionate about the things that you can do. These edges that we all have, these edges that you have, they make you a very interesting person. And the idea is just, do you fit into the organization? Do you fit to the leader, to the management? And that's about it. And also, if you give someone feedback and they don't take it very well, maybe you are very important to them and they're embarrassed. Or their job is very important to them and they're very embarrassed. So again, you can learn something from the data they are giving you in response to the feedback. And there were at least 6 reasons why giving and taking feedback can be very, very problematic. And I hope that you got a couple of insights. And now, of course, it's time for your feedback. So any questions, any comments, leave them below and I'm trying to get back to them as soon as I can. And if you have a couple of other questions, just post them in the comments below and let's see if there is time for another video. See you next time.